Hello everyone, and welcome to the final reading of the smaller fan fictions that Cassandra Clare did, all the way back in the early thousands. So this one is very short, so I hope you all enjoy it. And just a quick note here, for the month of December, I am going to try to do as many chapters in Draco Veritas as I can. I am planning on doing at least one a week, but that does depend on my editing process and how quickly I can turn that over. So, wish me luck with that, and that is my Christmas present to all of you. I know times are really hard and tough right now, so I hope that I can bring you some semblance of holiday cheer by giving you Harry Potter fan fiction. So, without further ado, let's just get right into it. This Perfect World, Part 1. Author's Notes. I rode an H/H fluffball for Nari. What a wrench for me to write anything that doesn't have Draco in it. Probably a good exercise, though, and a good exercise in writing canon style, which I've never really tried. Weebles. I love Nari. For Nari on her 16th birthday. Happy birthday, dear. Cassandra Clare. What would come, and he would have to meet it when it did. The Dursleys were silent all the way home from King's Cross. Dudley had been sent to a camp for rich children who needed to lose weight and was going to be gone all summer. Without Dudley there to start fights with Harry, Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia seemed to feel that there was no need to acknowledge his existence whatsoever. Harry barely noticed. Stepping off the train at the end of each school year, he always felt as if he'd been hollowed out, a part of him removed. He didn't know if it was the loss of his friends, or the loss of his entire identity as Harry Potter, or a combination of the two things that resulted in such a sense of deprivation. Usually it took a few days for him to master it entirely. This year, he wondered if the horror of recent events might mean it would take longer. They arrived at the house just as it was beginning to get dark. Number 4 Privet Drive looked as it always had. Small, ugly, and overstuffed with furniture and photographs of Dudley. Harry's aunt and uncle immediately vanished into the living room with glares, and Harry was left to drag his heavy trunk upstairs by himself. The second bedroom was also just as it had been when he'd left. Narrow bed, small nightstand, desk, cheap table, a chair, and piles of broken or discarded toys and gadgets tossed into the corners. The window was half open, and dust motes danced in the faint shafts of sunlight that penetrated the dimness. Harry set Hedwig's cage on the nightstand and sat down on the bed, feeling very weary. Slowly, he began to peel off his jacket. As he did so, something crackled in the pocket. He paused and felt the outside of the fabric. There was very definitely the outline of something pressing through the material. He reached inside curiously and withdrew a small piece of folded parchment. He looked at it blankly, quite sure it had not been in his pocket when he changed clothes on the train. How had it gotten there? He turned it over and then unfolded it. With a slight start of surprise, he recognized Hermione's handwriting. Dear Harry, I wanted to tell you this while you were at school, but there was never a real chance to talk to you alone. I wanted you to know how sorry I am about everything that happened. When Ron and I told you that it wasn't your fault, I didn't think you believed us. Harry, there was nothing you could have done, and nobody else in the world would have done half as much as you did. I wanted you to know that I worry about you, but I also feel proud and privileged to have you for a friend. So try to remember that while you're stuck at your aunt and uncle's over the summer, and remember that whatever happens, we will all face it together eventually. So take care of yourself, because we love you. Be careful. Love, Hermione. Harry sat and stared at the letter, feeling very odd. It was a sweet letter, and a kind one, very Hermione in that respect. He could almost see her standing there while he was reading, looking anxious, biting her bottom lip as she did when she was worried, winding a curl of dark brown hair around her fingers. It made him feel touched, wasn't the word, but he didn't feel saddened either. He felt somehow electrified, as if her concern had given him a jolt of sensation that he couldn't quite describe. He touched the letter, his nerves humming with the same odd energy. Then he folded it up and tucked it into his breast pocket to reread later. Harry had never thought it would be possible for him to miss Dudley, but he found that he did, mainly because without Dudley there for his aunt and uncle to fuss over, they had nothing to occupy themselves with except their intense dissatisfaction with everything related to Harry Potter. Aunt Petunia dragged him out for a haircut, which turned out to be so short that Harry was convinced he looked bald from a distance. Of course, it grew back overnight, and even longer, which only made Petunia hysterical. Harry was tempted to go and get a nose piercing or a tattoo to see if he'd wake up the next morning without it, but gave it up due to lack of funds, as well as a lack of free time, for the Dursleys were keeping their nephew very busy indeed. They made Harry go out the shower, clean the drain pipes, fix the creaky floorboards, weed the garden, wax their car, and carry enormous, weighty food parcels to the post office every day, where they were meant to be shipped to Dudley, despite the fact that Dudley was at a camp in order to lose weight. On occasion, Harry would read Dudley's letters to his parents on the way back to Privet Drive. The camp Dudley had been sent to was very expensive and involved a lot of horseback riding. Problematic for Dudley, since Petunia's daily envoys of clotted cream and sausage were clearly not helping matters. It was amusing, to say the least. The only other bright spot about having to go round to the post office every day was that it allowed him to communicate with Hermione. She sent her letters directly there, where he picked them up almost daily. Her missives were long, chatty, and informative. She was studying protective charms over the summer. She was reading. She was trying to practice flying in her backyard, but it was hopeless. She'd fallen into a rose bush and had to be extracted by her parents, who, it turned out, were not at all happy about what she'd done with her teeth, and her description of the reaction made him laugh out loud, while at the same time he had to fight a strange urge to rush over there and explain to them that it wasn't her fault at all. It seemed to him sometimes that these letters were all that stood between him and a powerful loneliness. Ron was on holiday in Romania with his family, and although Harry got a few letters from him, short, excited missives in Ron's familiar looping script, he couldn't write back. The Dursleys had once again forced him to keep Hedwig stowed in her padlock cage, and Ron, at no fixed address, had been using unreliable camp owls who never agreed to take letters back. Sometimes Harry would sit by the window and read Hermione's letters in the moonlight repeatedly. She seemed to know what would cheer him up without having to be asked, and reported briskly and thoroughly on all the news of the wizarding world and what was happening with their classmates over the summer. Parvati Patil had flown to France to visit one of the Beauxbatons boys, and her parents had had to enlist the French Minister of Magic to find and send her back. Justin Finch Fletchley had adopted a Puffskein, which had gotten itself run over on the M1, leading to awkward questions from the authorities. Seamus Finnegan, attempting to turn the well water in his village into whiskey, had accidentally poisoned half his town. Fortunately, the results had not been fatal. And so on. The second week in June, Hermione went with her family on holiday to Tanzania. Harry was a bit worried that this might mean a cessation of letters, but she continued to write every day, sending her letters by owl instead of post. After a week, she sent him a small box containing a wizarding snapshot of herself on the beach with her parents, waving and smiling. Underneath that was a postcard that was entirely dark, with the words "Tanzania by night" spelled out in silvery letters. He thought it was an annoying joke, until he realized he could see faint shapes and shadows moving under the darkness. He had the odd feeling that if the shadows would only lighten, he would be able to see Hermione through them, although if it was dark in Tanzania, she was probably already asleep. Restless in the hot night, the covers kicked down to her feet. He blinked and set the postcard down on his nightstand. That night, when he crumpled into bed, exhausted after spending all day mending the roof tiles, he dreamed. In the dream, he was on the beach, standing ankle-deep in warm sand. He had never been to the ocean, but he recognized it from photographs. The water stretched away before him, as thick and blue as paint, the waves laced with gold over their foaming tops. The sound of the surf was loud in his ears, and he wondered if this was what the ocean really sounded like. Like music. He turned from the water and looked down the shore. It was empty, except for a single figure walking towards him in the distance. He stood where he was, and as the figure approached, he saw that it was Hermione. She looked as she had in the photo that she had sent, very brown from the sun, and her hair looped back into braids. There was a row of golden freckles across the bridge of her nose, and her teeth were very white against her tan skin. She was wearing a white sundress that didn't quite deserve to be called a dress. It was more of a flimsy handkerchief of white linen held up with impossibly narrow straps. She continued walking, and might have walked right past him had he not called out her name. She turned and looked at him. Above her, gulls wheeled and screamed against a painfully blue sky. The sun was bright in Harry's eyes. He took a step towards her, and another, and she waited there, looking at him with a patient, curious gaze. He was close enough to her now that the blown tendrils of her hair brushed his face, tickling his arm. The left strap of her dress had slid down her arm, baring the smooth skin of her shoulder, molasses brown and unmarked in the clear, transparent sunlight. Because it was a dream, he reached out without any shyness and looped his fingers around the strap, gently tugging it up and back into place. And because it was a dream, she covered his hand with hers and looked up at him with such an expression of desire that the only thing that now seemed important was to somehow get closer to her, to put his arms around her and pull her close to his body. And he woke up with the sheets tangled around his waist and his heart going like a jackhammer in his chest. It took several moments for the feeling of panicked shock to subside, and then when he looked over at his nightstand table, he saw the picture of Hermione propped up against the books she had sent him. The front of it had changed. Now it showed the words Tanzania by day in gold, and showed a dawn-lit expanse where Hermione stood with her arm around a palm tree, looking bored. In the background, he could see her parents examining a pair of camels. Hermione was wearing a dark blue dress and thin strapped sandals on her tanned feet. Feeling dizzy, he reached out and flipped the postcard over so that it faced away from him. Dimly, he noticed that his hand was shaking. What was going on? Harry had no more dreams that week. He received 2 more letters from Hermione, who was back in England. He did not respond to them. The days crawled by, and then it was his birthday. As always, it was much like any other miserable day in the Dursley household. His aunt and uncle gave him a wrapper off a Mars bar in honor of the fact that he'd survived the last 15 years. Then Uncle Vernon made him spend 6 hours refitting the copper pipes in the basement, until Harry was miserable, sweaty, and soaked in dirty water. When he trudged up to his bedroom, he found his birthday presents from Ron and the Weasleys on the windowsill. Ron had gotten him a gleaming black scale from a Hungarian horntail, and there was a birthday cake from Mrs. Weasley. Fred and George had gotten him a pack of Quidditch trading cards, and Charlie had sent a bag of magical Romanian coins. However, he found that the birthday present he was most looking forward to receiving was Hermione's. She had always been good at getting him gifts. Harry still used the broomstick servicing kit she'd gotten him in 3rd year, and for some reason, this year, he was more curious than ever to see what she'd come up with. He went to gather up the daily basket of goodies for Dudley in a lighter mood than usual, and swung by the post office counter with a feeling of expectation. "Potter, Harry," he said, holding out his school identification card. The photo had been taken when he was 11, but it was still better than nothing. "Anything for me?" The red-faced counter clerk shook his head. "No post for you, sorry." Harry blinked in astonishment. "Are you quite sure? Could you check?" With an exasperated grunt, the man went to check and returned empty-handed. When Harry asked him to check one last time, he received a beady-eyed stare and a loud bark. "Get along with you, then." Harry got along, but in a very dark mood indeed. Underneath the feeling of hurt that Hermione had forgotten his birthday was a faint and growing feeling of worry. Was she angry that he hadn't written back to her past 2 letters? Or worse, that she somehow guessed from his silence that he was suddenly nervous and afraid? Did she know about his dream? Of course she couldn't possibly. And anyway, dreams didn't mean anything. Once he dreamt he'd lived in a shoe and was married to an Argyle sock. Surely one could not be responsible for the felicitations of one's subconscious. When he returned to Never 4 Privet Drive, Vernon and Petunia were gone. They had had a dinner party to attend. The house was dark and lightless. He went upstairs to his bedroom, opened the door, and his heart jumped. On the bed was a small, white-wrapped package. He raced across the room and seized it up, spinning it over to see the small card pinned to the bottom. It was from Sirius. For no reason that he could justify, Harry felt his heart plummet down to his feet. "Drat Sirius," he thought fiercely, and immediately felt guilty. It wasn't Sirius's fault that he seemed to be going a bit mad. He removed the wrapping without much enthusiasm to find 2 bright gold tickets to the upcoming Chudley Cannons Puddlemere United game. In other circumstances, Harry would have been deliriously happy to have them, but now his only thought was that the only person he wanted to bring to the game with him was Hermione, even though she hated Quidditch, and usually just sat in the stands and read a book. He had a sudden mental image of her sitting in the stands during practice, watching the Gryffindor team fly, a book spread open on her lap and the sun on her hair. "Ugh," he thought to himself inequably. "I'm definitely going round the twist here." He sat down on his bed and moodily broke off a piece of Mrs. Weasley's peanut butter molasses cake. He wasn't sure what was a worse possibility, that Hermione had forgotten his birthday, or that she was furious with him for being neglectful. Of course, neither possibility seemed at all in character for the girl who had every single one of her friends' birthdays plugged into a remember-all. He lay down, taking great pleasure in putting his muddy feet on the duvet cover. Let Aunt Petunia have a heart attack. He picked up a pillow and put it over his face, then lay there, listening to the clock tick, until something tapped on his shoulder, and he sat up with a yell of surprise. It was a medium-sized barn owl, and there was a package tied to its leg. Harry's heart leapt, and he reached out and took the package with anxious fingers. Quickly he paid the barn owl with a knot, and watched as it disappeared through the open window. Then he looked down at the package in his hand. It was addressed to him, in Hermione's handwriting. He tore it open, and a folded parchment fell out onto his lap, followed by a small drawstring bag. He opened the bag and upended the contents into his lap. There was a long, thin strip of leather, like a broad, flat shoelace, and a letter. He picked up the letter and began to read. "I didn't dare send this via ordinary post, because it's very valuable, and if it were destroyed, I doubt I could make another one. It took me a week to make it, and I had to do it in Tanzania, so that they wouldn't know I was using magic out of term. It's a Vigilus charm. It's meant to watch over you when nobody else can, to keep you safe from harm and protected. It can absorb most curses and will warn you when there's danger, and if you're injured, it will keep you from bleeding to death. I know it sounds grim to even talk about those things, but I want you to keep it, Harry, and wear it always. Not for me, but for you. Happy birthday. All my love, Hermione." Harry sat very still, looking at the object in his hand. It resembled nothing so much as a thin leather strap, very soft and supple, and felt somehow alive under his touch. Not knowing what else to do with it, he wound it around his wrist and tied it firmly there. It shuddered as soon as he let go of it, and seemed to contract in on itself, the loose ends vanishing until it was a smooth leather band around his wrist. So she hadn't forgotten, and she wasn't angry. "All my love, Hermione." A very strange sensation was spreading up his spine. She always signed her letters, "Love Hermione." She had done for years. If it seemed different to him suddenly, it was because he had changed, not because Hermione was doing anything different. And she had always worried about his safety. That was nothing new either. He remembered how panicked she'd been when his name had been pulled out of the goblet, recalled how worried she'd been during the first task, how she'd run into the tent afterwards with fingernail marks on her face. "You were amazing, Harry. You really were." No, he thought, looking down at the strap on his wrist. Hermione was doing nothing differently. It was he himself who had changed. Very slowly, he got up and went over to his school trunk. He knelt down beside it, opened it up, and took out his dog-eared copy of A Basic Guide to Charms. The front was covered with inky scribbles where he, Ron, and Hermione had spent an afternoon playing wizard hangman. At the end of the game, the unfortunate hangman drawing always expired with much foot-kicking. At the bottom, Hermione had scrawled an irate note to Ron. "There is no second E in argument." Harry smiled faintly and opened the book, flipping to the end, where the V section was. He found it almost immediately. The Vigilus Charm. Perhaps the most powerful localized protection spell in existence. This charm is rarely used due to the exacting toll it takes on its creator. It is, in essence, a reversal charm linked with a spell of protection. It requires a token from the one to be protected, hair, a bit of clothing, to be mixed with a token from the witch or wizard performing the spell. If performed correctly, the result of the spell will be that whatever harm might come to the one under the charm's protection will be visited instead on the creator of the spell. If the protected one is wounded, the wound will appear on the body of the witch or wizard who created the charm. The creation of such charms is strictly regulated by the ministry. Harry slammed the book shut, his heart pounding in disbelief. He couldn't quite believe Hermione had done something so audacious, and so dangerous, and so stupid. This wasn't just any present she had given him. This was her life. And she had wrapped it and packaged it up neatly as if he could expect nothing less for his birthday. What was she thinking? He let the book slide to the ground and scrabbled behind the trunk for his broomstick and his father's cloak. Saw the regulation that said he wasn't supposed to fly over the summer. He needed to see Hermione right away. To be continued. Of course, she never did. And that is the end of that story and the end of all of Cassandra Clare's side quest fan fictions. It's nice to be coming to the end of something. I hope you all enjoyed that. So, once again, like, comment, subscribe to the channel, and if you are new here, welcome. And if you are interested in supporting me monetarily, I have a Ko-fi and a Patreon that are both linked here on my YouTube. And like I said, I will be doing my very best to get out as many chapters of Draco Veritas that I can during the month of December. And I hope everyone has a very safe holiday. And I'll see you all in the next one. Good night.